Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this awesome live event on the 12 Principles of Viral Content. My name is Kate Taylor-Mighty. I'm a marketer here at HubSpot, and I'll be moderating our virtual panel here. On the line, we've got Justin Champion, our Academy content professor here at HubSpot, and Nadia Koja, who's the director of marketing at Venngage. Before these two get started breaking down all the secrets to creating contagious content, I do just want to go over a couple of things with everyone. Nadia and Justin are going to take the first 45 minutes or so to share their thoughts on the topic, and then we'll jump straight into answering questions from Twitter via hashtag viral content hacks. I'll be keeping an eye out for those throughout the session and queuing them up for when the time comes. If you do need to duck out early today or you want to rewatch things again, the event will be recorded, and I'll be posting the recording on this same thank you page that you used to register, and I'll resend the link as well. And on that note, I will hand it off to Nadia and Justin.
Hey, everyone. Super pumped that so many of you guys decided to show up. Like Catherine said, if you have any questions during this training session, you can tweet using the viral content hacks hashtag, which is there on the screen. And my Twitter handle is there as well if you want to include me in any of your questions or just to say hey. Justin, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So like Kate said, I'm the content professor for HubSpot Academy. Really excited to be here today and work with you, Nadia.
Awesome. Okay, so just a little bit of background about me before we get started. I actually don't have a marketing or business education. I have a theater background, specifically in something called devised theater. And my program's focus was on collaboratively building productions from the ground up. So we weren't given a script, we weren't given a general theme or concept to work with. We were simply told to make a show and tell a great story. So for many of you who might be the content creators at your businesses, you probably understand that having too much creative freedom can actually be pretty stunting sometimes. So part of the process that my group and university used to help us conceive of memorable story ideas was to actually set limitations for ourselves instead of trying to come up with good ideas. So our brainstorming sessions were not about what we could do, but rather about what we were not allowed to do. And shockingly, it's by setting those limitations that it's what actually helped us come up with more creative and more engaging and more viral concepts. So the goal for today is to provide you with some of these framing principles that will give you some of those limitations so that you can really start to get creative. So before getting into that, let's start by understanding what it means for content to be viral. So the word viral means relating to a piece of content that is circulated rapidly and widely from one web user to another. So in other words, you want to create great content that's intended to be shared across social networks and spread like a virus. Now, the problem that a lot of people face when trying to produce this viral content is that they rush into the topic selection process. Now, most people spend maybe 10 minutes or so coming up with a list of possible subjects to write on without really thinking about the reason behind writing them. And they focus on coming up with the most clickbait headline they can think of. So what we tend to do is toss these ideas into a spreadsheet and use this to generate a wealth of content ideas that will last us the entire quarter. And it might seem like the most productive process, but it really isn't. So if your goal is quantity over content quality, then sure, this tactic might work for you. But if you really want to create high quality content with viral potential, then it's time to start re-envisioning your planning process. So what's the solution? What makes content stick in your audience's mind and drives them to share it over and over again? So I actually Googled the phrase, how to write quality content that stands out. That was the Google suggested query. And I was curious to see what was ranking and what people had to say on the subject. And one of the suggestions was to create engaging and thought-provoking content. Well, gee, thanks for the suggestion, Google. The author's following points were to leave your readers with questions, have an important and promising introduction, and tell a story. And although this might provide a good summary of what's needed, the article actually failed to tell the reader how to create engaging and thought-provoking content. How do you leave your readers with questions? How do you write an important and promising introduction? And how do you tell a compelling story? And the truth is, it's hard. There's a lot of competition out there, and having to constantly produce engaging and thought-provoking content is really difficult to do. But it's easier if you know how to approach the creation process. So I'm going to share the 12 principles that guide the way in which Venngage and myself create content. And it's in following these principles that we've managed to get nearly effortless mentions on sites like Business Insider, Fast Company, Wired, Distractify, Forbes, and all those big name publications that everybody wants to get noticed by, which in turn has resulted in massive blog growth. So we'll jump right in, and if Justin, you have anything you want to add in or ask, feel free to just interrupt.
It definitely will.
Okay. All right, so the first principle, when it comes to producing content with potential for virality, one principle that can really help guide you is to create content that solves a burning problem. So this approach requires you to first think about the problem that you're trying to solve or the questions that you're trying to answer with your story. And it usually requires you to place yourself in your reader's shoes. So first ask yourself this: what are the problems your audience is facing? And then use that to identify or discover topics and stories from those answers. So for instance, let's talk about AMAs on Reddit and inbound.org. Why are they so popular? It's because it gives normal people the opportunity to ask successful people questions that they believe will lead to their own eventual success. Why do statistics and data-driven pieces perform so well organically? It's because you're providing new answers to existing questions. Now, every year, the Content Marketing Institute publishes this report on content marketing benchmarks, budgets, and trends. And last year, their report was linked to over 7,000 times. Sites like Forbes, HubSpot, Entrepreneur, Moz, Social Media Examiner, and thousands of other sites were referencing this content. And the reason why is because it provided new insights to questions that literally every marketer had on their mind. How does my content compare to the industry standards? So this is an example of solving a burning problem. What you need to do is find the data or the information that you possess that your audience wants or needs and present it to them in a way which provides value, but that also can position yourself as a leader in the industry. Do you have anything to add to that, Justin?
Yeah, so one important thing I was even going to say, and how you can even solve a burning problem and make sure that you're actually being accurate with it, is understanding your audience and this idea of buyer personas. And what a buyer persona is, it's a semi-fictional representation of your ideal audience based on quantitative and qualitative analysis. So really what that means is that we all have businesses that we work for. Those businesses have products and services they're trying to sell, and those products and services are meant to attract a specific audience, which is made up of your buyer persona. So if you really want to solve a burning problem and be accurate with it and attract the right audience, make that detailed representation of that buyer persona, because it'll actually give you a head start at making sure that you're creating content effectively for the right audience.
100%. I've got another principle coming up that actually goes a little bit more in depth with that. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up now. So we'll jump in the second principle. And this is to find hacks or shortcuts to common struggles. So I don't know if anyone here has read or at least heard of the book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. Of course you have, because it went viral. And I was definitely one of those people that bought the book. Did I read it? Some of it. And the book provides a new approach to house cleaning. So the end goal is still to declutter your home and essentially live as more of a minimalist. But what makes this book different from every other book on house cleaning? Well, the solution is framed as a hack, as a magical solution, rather than something you actually have to work hard towards achieving. So the simple question that a lot of people remember from this book is, does this thing spark joy? The author, Mary Kondo, recommends that if the answer to that question is no, then you should get rid of the object. Now, most books, videos, or guides you see on decluttering your home will usually tell you to get rid of something if you haven't used it in the past 6 months. But Mary, the author, has positioned the cleaning process as something deeper than utility. She makes it about joy. So asking somebody to think on the past 6 months requires brain power, right? You actually have to look back in time. It's tiring to do, especially if you're going through like a pile of 30 different outfits like I'm doing right now because I'm moving. But we know instantly if something makes us happy. So offering a simplified solution or process for completing a task can actually make any struggle seem a lot easier to manage. Now, another way of looking at finding hacks to common struggles, if you're looking for examples, is DIY YouTube videos. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the video of the guy showing you how to fold a shirt in under 2 seconds, but that video has over 15 million views, and it's literally a guy folding a shirt. Look it up after this. It's maybe like a 10-second, 15-second video. But the thing is folding a shirt really a major problem that a lot of us have? And I'm pretty sure if you went and timed yourself folding a shirt, it might take you maybe 5 seconds tops. But the thing is, laundry is an annoying chore, right? And folding laundry is probably one of the most frustrating parts about doing the chore, because it's time consuming and it's usually pretty inconsistent. The way you're folding your clothes, you can never really get the pile looking perfect. But at the same time, it's not a major pain point or struggle that a lot of us deal with. So why are 15 million people watching this guy fold a shirt? And it's because he's done two things. He's identified a common task that we're all familiar with, but he's demonstrated a simple yet structured method of accomplishing the task to save you time. So ask yourself this the next time you're working on your content. What is something that all or most of your users, your readers, your customers are familiar with and that they do on a day-to-day basis? And is there a way that you can structure that process and simplify it? And if you can do that, you found a hack to a common struggle. So the main keyword there is structured and simplified. What do you think about that?
And I have to say that book is phenomenal. I love that you use this as an example. I live in an Airstream that's 140 square feet with my wife, and that book was one of the biggest facets of our downsizing process. And not only making sure that things are providing value and bringing joy, but one thing, and I heard that you're just moving, so know that when you're parting with something, you might think initially the first time you go through, oh, I need this shirt, or I need this book, or whatever it is. And then if you go through a couple of iterations of downsizing, by the fifth time, you're like, I don't want this shirt. I'm going to burn it. I don't need this book. So it's something that will really help. And it's something definitely, I just completely agree with it.
Yeah. And it's funny because like I have so many clothes, but at the same time, I maybe wear like, I go through the same 3 shirts. And if those shirts are all in the laundry, I'm like, I have nothing to wear. Even though my whole
I hear you.
So full. But yeah, so moving on to the next principle, this is actually one of my favorite principles when it comes to creating viral content. And it's the principle of busting a myth. And what this means is really finding a way to disprove a common theory. So one example that I can share is of an article and interactive infographic my colleague Ryan actually worked on. So he wanted to disprove the theory that millennials are lazy and entitled. So he dissected 7 popular myths on the topic, all backed up with data from highly credible sources. And the article performed exceptionally well and continues to drive traffic to the site. And then the next web syndicated the article, which resulted in a whole new wave of comments and debate. Now, a common result of using the bust a myth principle is that it often causes debate since you're stirring the pot and questioning a really strong belief. Now, a lot of companies try to shy away from creating content that takes a strong stance or presents a strong opinion out of fear that people will get mad. But that being said, we found that there's a lot more benefit than harm that comes from having a strong opinion. And what this does help with is brand recognition, and as a result, better SEO. So the more people that know about you, the more tend to link to you more frequently, and then you get brand loyalty from those who actually agree with you. That being said, this article was probably one of the most controversial things we've done because apparently a lot of people think strongly about millennials and really do think we're lazy and entitled. But it ended up getting shared so much because people were either angry about it and wanted to share it or strongly agreed with it and wanted to share it. So we'll move on.
Yeah, and even on, yeah, I was just going to say really quickly on that. A lot of times when you're busting the myth, people like that, right? Like they might want the excitement out of it. When I think of busting a myth, I think of Blend Tech with the Will It Blend series, this idea that can we blend an iPhone? Can we blend a bowling ball if we can get a blender big enough? But it creates some sort of excitement and it intrigues people, which is probably why even the show Mythbusters is such a big deal. Yeah. Because a lot of times if you're trying to bust a myth, whether or not it's busted or not is still the act of actually going through and trying to figure it out. So I think there's a lot of fun that you can have with it as well, where it might not be as controversial sometimes.
Yeah, totally. And you get that opportunity to explore the data and really dive deep into it. And that's where people learn. So the next principle is actually similar to the bust a myth principle, but it's to challenge the status quo. So this is a great way to position yourself and your company as influencers in a certain area. And Gary Vee is someone who does this really frequently. So I'm not sure how many people follow his medium, but one popular article of his is entitled "Super Bowl Ads Aren't Expensive Enough." Now, for anyone who's familiar with the Super Bowl, you might be aware that in 2016, the average cost of an ad on CBS was $5 million, or $170,000 a second. Now, some networks charged almost as much as $10 million a minute for ad time. So to make a claim that this isn't expensive enough seems absolutely ridiculous. But his argument is that the Super Bowl is the one time during the year where people are actually excited to watch the ads. And because we've been ingrained to believe that Super Bowl ads are better than the game itself, typically we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight for that attention. So the only day a year when people are willingly giving their attention up, the price is only slightly higher than most companies' budgets. So by challenging the status quo, what he's done is he's shocked people. And as a result, he pushes them towards sharing that content. Because like I said before, you either strongly agree or you disagree with the claims, but either way, you have something to say, right?
Exactly. And I would even expand on that sometimes with challenging the status quo can really start a whole movement. It makes me think of Jay Schaefer, who is the owner or CEO of Tumbleweed Tiny House Company, which was like the original tiny house company that came out many years ago, where I think he lived in like 100 square foot house. And I think he still lives in something very small like that today. But that was the first site that really started this whole movement. So a lot of times when you challenge the status quo, an entire movement can really happen with that, and you can start getting other people a part of it.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I don't know if this is exactly challenging the status quo, but there was recently a Twitter conversation that I was part of. And the argument was that there was just not enough female representation in conferences, right? And this is a topic that I agree strongly with and talk a lot about. But what ended up happening is all of these people started getting so passionate about the subject and the topic of not enough female representation that they started tagging all of these different people, all of these different women that wanted to speak, that were in the tech space. And it ended up becoming this movement called Present Her. So if you want to check out the conversation, like check out the hashtag. But what Unbounce ended up doing is they bought the domain and created this whole site about just females in the space, that now if you want to find a female speaker, you just go to the site and there's a huge list of tech marketers that are women. So yeah, just like one small idea, one small concept, and it can really get the conversation going.
That's definitely challenging the status quo. A whole website, there's whole conversation starting with it. I love that.
Exactly. So we'll move into the next principle now, which is to reframe the question. So the best way to describe this principle is looking at this example by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, the organization was trying to get people to understand why malaria vaccination is important, or why you should care about malaria. So instead of directly asking the question and simply presenting the facts and listing out the death toll caused by malaria like one would normally do, they created this infographic about the world's deadliest animals. So when you see that nearly 1 million people die every year from mosquito bites and only 10 people die a year from shark attacks, the data becomes a lot more surprising and memorable, specifically because we're more likely to be afraid of sharks than mosquitoes. But by offering a comparison and presenting the question in a different way, the idea that malaria vaccination is actually a really simple way to avoid death becomes stickier. So when you're using this principle, first you want to identify what the question is that you're trying to ask and approach it from a different angle. So it's not completely creating a new question, it's just coming at it from a different position.
Yeah, and something funny with this, when I was in high school, I wanted to play paintball. My mom was like, I don't know about that. It sounds really dangerous. And I found this article in a magazine that said it listed out all the different activities of what's the most injury prone sport. And I think golfing was higher up than paintball. So using data to tell a story like that can really be powerful because it puts it in perspective.
Exactly. I hate paintball. So did you end? Yeah, I hate paintball.
I know. I got to play it, but then you get hit and you get a welt, and you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah, I remember I shot a guy. I shot a guy in the back of the neck, and I freaked out because I thought I killed him because the paintball happened to be red, and it was like a really traumatic experience. I was very young. I haven't been paintballing since.
Yeah, that sounds pretty scary.
That being said, the next principle is to bring in a new perspective. So this is a little bit similar, but not identical, and I'll get into that. So what do I mean by bringing in a new perspective? Well, most stories are told from a very conventional point of view. A lot of content writers don't really think outside the box. they stick to the obvious perspective and common frameworks of writing blog posts and stories, right? But we're different from those other content marketers. For example, most writers who are writing about sports, let's say basketball and the current form of Stephen Curry, the perspective taken might usually be from, the typical sports angle. They comment on the percentage of shots taken, his performance compared with other great players, how his three-point game is statistically unlike any other players, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a few months ago, I think I saw over 50 different stories and infographics on the accuracy of his three-point shooting. Now, they're not bad stories, but they are all the same. And unless you somehow manage to get your story covered on a channel like ESPN, no one is going to care about it because every other news channel has already covered it. So what can you do to differentiate your piece from the rest? You bring in a new perspective. And these are just a few examples on how to do that. So the first example compares CEO traits and athletes' traits. The second example looks at NBA valuation and revenue generated per team. And the third uses economics to analyze the cost per shot of various athletes. So these are still on the topic of NBA and sports, but now you're bringing in a completely new view of how to analyze that information. So the trick here is to go outside of the traditional perspective and present these stories through a different lens. So another example is maybe you do yoga or you do martial arts or you like to cook. What similarities might those hobbies have with running a business? So the next principle I'll cover is similar to this idea, but it goes a little bit deeper. But before we get into that, I don't know if Justin, you have anything to add to this one.
Yeah, the thing I love most about it is that the relatable factor, right? When we talked about buyer personas in the beginning, if you're going to find a way to be able to communicate with an audience, especially if it's like CEOs versus athletes, two different types of audiences, but you're making some sort of connection and people can really relate to it. So I think the relatability of it is definitely important, just understanding your audience.
Mm-hmm. And totally. And this next principle is makes a lot of topics very relatable. So it's a good segue. So this one is actually the mashup principle. I really like this one too, because it's easy to do and it's a lot of fun to do. So mashups, as you probably know, are the idea of taking two seemingly unrelated concepts and finding an element that connects them. So this is a particularly good way of combining trending topics with evergreen ideas. So evergreen ideas are topics that last forever. Trending themes kind of have an expiration date. Now, since Venngage is a design tool, our design-related content is plenty. So some of you might remember this. When the Star Wars movie, The Force Awakens, was released, we decided to avoid doing yet another infographic design-related article and instead focus on the design elements that can be learned from Star Wars. So design, which is an evergreen topic for us, combined with Star Wars, a trending topic at the time, resulted in the perfect piece of content, which was later featured by Fast Company, and it ended up going viral on 9gag. Now, another example was done by a software company called Dawes. And in order to highlight their tool and the type of data collected at the time, they approached us to create an infographic which analyzed the type of language used on Twitter by some of the presidential candidates. So this is another way of mashing up their tools capabilities with the trending topic. And as a result, the infographic ended up getting picked up by Adweek. So what are some other possible trending topics that can be mashed up with an aspect of your business? It might be comparing Lord of the Rings to your SEO strategy. I often like to refer to Google as Lord Sauron, or Harry Potter to your company culture, which we also did. So you can't do any of those ideas. The point is you can appeal to a much wider audience using this mashup principle. And it makes it a lot more fun because you're actually talking about something that you enjoy writing about and finding that relatable element, right?
Exactly. And it could even be the Red Sox winning the 2013 World Series and then HubSpot renaming all the different conference rooms after each player. Pedroia and Ortiz is obviously my favorite conference room in the building.
Wasn't he at Inbound last year?
Who?
Ortiz?
Ortiz?
Was he?
If he was and I missed him, that would be, are you messing with me right now? I think you might be.
I don't know. I don't know anything about sports, but I remember like, we're talking about business.
I would remember that, I feel.
Okay, I have to jump in to confirm that he was in fact at Inbound last year. Sorry you missed him, Justin. Yeah, it was a huge surprise.
Where was I?
I don't know, but it was the place went wild.
I don't know if I can do the rest of this webinar anymore now. I'm just kidding.
Go and cry.
Yeah. Well, I'll go away again, but yeah, I just had to keep it real.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I'm sorry, I thought you knew.
Yeah, me
but you know
too.
what? I know what will make you feel better. It's principle 8, which is to go outside your immediate field. So I'm actually going to use HubSpot as an example here, and I really hope you're all familiar with HubSpot. And the reason, so just to put it in perspective, they position themselves as a hub for all things related to digital marketing and even sales. But the primary tool is a CRM. So just because HubSpot sells a CRM doesn't mean that all of the content needs to be about using that CRM. And the blog branches out into a variety of different topics, from SEO to advertising to entrepreneurship to content marketing, like we're doing right now. And as a result, they are now a go-to resource for anyone looking to expand their knowledge on marketing. So the point is to not focus solely on your immediate field. Venture outside of that tiny bubble and find out how you can connect your main product or offering to topics that fall outside of your specific realm. So the example on the screen right now is I'm using Venngage as an example. So this tiny little bubble in the middle, at the bottom there is infographics. We're about infographics, but we don't only talk about infographics all the time. We also cover content marketing, but the greater field is the online marketing space. So find problems in that area and how they tie into your direct offering. So Shopify is another example of this, right? Their immediate field is e-commerce, but they produce content on a wide range of topics as well, specifically entrepreneurship, because they know that if you're an entrepreneur, part of making money is having a store and selling a product online. So this is where e-commerce ties in. They sell the dream of entrepreneurship first, and then e-commerce becomes a byproduct of that.
Yeah, and something interesting even on this, I believe it's on topic, is stepping outside your field is definitely important. It's also important to make sure that you're not just talking about your brand and your company, right? It's the idea of being helpful, being human. I created this content marketing certification with the HubSpot Academy last year. It launched last November around Inbound when Ortiz was there, and apparently I was the only one that didn't know this. But that certification doesn't really even talk about HubSpot as much in it as it does how to be a successful content marketer and giving you a well-rounded foundation. So a lot of times, even just creating content that can span out past your business can drive people in because you're being helpful, human, and holistic.
Yeah, exactly. It just comes down to providing value for your audience. Okay, so we'll jump into the next principle, which is to find niches and subcultures to comment on. So for anyone who wasn't aware, I'm from Toronto, and in Toronto, there's a Facebook group that's become massive in the span of a couple of years. And the group is called Buns, and there are actually close to 50 subgroups that branch off of the main Buns group. So there's the Buns Trading Zone, the Buns Home Zone, which is actually where I found my apartment, the Buns Pet Zone, which is where I found my dog, the Buns Mental Health Zone, and even the Buns Dank Meme Zone. Now, for those of you who are not aware of what a dank meme is, it's a funny meme. And what's shocking about this particular group is that in the span of just a couple of months, it went from being one person who added a few of their friends to share memes to a group of almost 3,000 people now. Now, this group has been written about on the Huffington Post, on XO Jane, and continues to be written about on a bunch of publications. I think Vice even recently mentioned it. But why are so many people willing to feature stories about a group of, I'll be honest, socially awkward people sharing funny memes with each other? And another question you might ask is, why is Reddit such a popular site? And the truth is that a vast majority of people become obsessive about subcultures to the point that it's kind of cultish. So using this principle, we decided to create a map of all of the betrayals that occurred in the Game of Thrones. What ended up happening was that the infographic got picked up and featured on Distractify, which is kind of like a clickbaity BuzzFeed type media company. And the infographic in question ended up getting shared by George Takei. Now, in my email, I did mention I would share the story. So George Takei shared this on Facebook, on Twitter. And what happened was our site crashed from too much referral traffic. And we actually had to block a lot of different sites that were hosting this infographic. So the thing is, subcultures tend to grow very quickly. And Game of Thrones is a series that's been published for a long time, right? In fact, it was published in the mid-90s, I think. And only recently has the interest grown to what it is now. I don't know how many of you guys are fans of RuPaul's Drag Race. It's a show about drag queens and has a subreddit of over 60,000 people, all of which are extremely engaged. And it has nearly as many people as the marketing subreddit group. So let me put it this way. The top post in the past 24 hours in the marketing subreddit had 109 upvotes. And the top post in the RuPaul's Drag Race subreddit from the past 24 hours had more than 600 upvotes. So subcultures engage people, and generalized topics do, but not nearly to the same degree.
Yeah, and another thing with subcultures is, you mentioned like as it grows, it starts to not really become a subculture anymore, because the more people that are a part of it, the more the values or whatever originally started starts to change a little bit. Mm-hmm. But you can almost see subcultures as highly engaged, even early adopters, right? Like you have an example, like 2,740 members. A lot of those people could be early adopters, and if it's something that they believe in, they're probably the people you want to be engaging with, because they're the ones that are really going to go to bat for what they believe in.
Exactly. And I think at this point, like that particular meme group has branched off into different subsects of variations of memes. So like people are still like moving out and starting their own other meme groups. And there's just like this web of memes now that I'm intertwined in.
Right.
All right. So the next one that we're going to be covering is to explore and visualize origin stories. Now, for every topic you choose to write about, there's an origin story of how that came to be. So if anyone here is into the Netflix Marvel series, there's always a lot of hype around the launch of a new Marvel series on Netflix. And in fact, according to Business Insider, each of the Marvel series, that being Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Daredevil, fall within the top 10 most viewed original shows on Netflix, all of them. In fact, superhero stories in general are some of the highest grossing films in Hollywood. In 2016, of the top 10 highest grossing movies, 4 of them were superhero movies. And you can see it this year. Like there's so many new superhero movies that keep coming out. And the reason is because they work. Now, I'm not suggesting that all the content you produce from this moment onward be about people getting bitten by spiders and developing fantastic abilities. But you can investigate the origin stories of specific fields of interests, of industries and companies, or of influential people. And these stories often make for really great content and really viral content. So if you think about it, we've all heard the stories of Richard Branson and of Steve Jobs building themselves and their companies up from a garage workshop. So these are the stories that excite and engage people because it motivates them. So think of what types of origin stories that you can tell. And one of the most common ways of depicting these origin stories in content marketing that has that viral potential is with the creation of timeline infographics. So there are some, we did one that was on Google I/O. So we did the history of Google I/O when the conference was out. And this ended up getting featured by Business Insider because it also applied to that mashup principle, right? It was a trending topic at the time, but it wasn't mashup because there was no like evergreen potential. But it was a trending topic, and it had this origin story associated with it. And then there's also a designer called Anna Vital, and I'm sure you've seen her infographics all over the place. They've been published on Fast Company. They're viral on Pinterest. And she always does these long timelines of different entrepreneurs and their life stories. So check her out because that's a really great example of one. So when you're looking to use this principle in your own content, you can think of aspects within your industry or your specific niche that have that interesting history and tell that story.
And if you find something that's an interesting story, like an origin story, you gave the example of Steve Jobs and Richard Branson. You gave the example of Marvel, where there's many different shows that are out right now. People are in this stage of binging content right now. I just binged Homeland in a couple of weeks. I haven't watched Bloodline season 3 yet. Don't tell me anything about it because I'm going to wait and binge that when I have a little bit more extra time. But when you find an origin story and it starts working for you, think about how you can repurpose that sort of framework or some sort of template so that you can do it again, because that's what's happening here, right? Like with Marvel, they found that they really like the origin stories of these different superheroes. So you see all these superhero movies coming out, all these different these shows coming out. But one thing to be aware of with that is not overkill with it, right? Like don't just find one thing and then just push it into the ground. Really find a way that you can continue being creative with it. But that's the big thing, is if you find something that works, think about how you can tell different stories for different things that would help support the business.
Yeah, totally. I'm pretty sure there's like another Spider-Man movie coming out too.
There is. What is this, like the 17th one now?
Something like that. I feel like I've
Yeah.
been seeing Spider-Man movies since I was born. So,
Right.
so the next principle is to envision the before and after state. And this kind of ties into what you were talking about before, Justin, on understanding your user personas. So for every customer, there's a before state, then before they find your product, and an after state. So then once they have found your product. And now your goal as a marketer, as a content marketer, is to help your customers see how much your product will help them succeed in achieving that after state. So the before and after state is broken down into 4 categories. You've got what the customer has, what the customer feels, the average day in the life of the customer, and the overall status of the customer. Now, let's use the example of baby bathtubs. So these are those soft, squishy bathtubs that you can put in the sink and they keep your baby safe. Well, the example on the screen presents the before and after case of purchasing one of these baby bathtubs. So who are they marketing to? It's obviously the parent of the baby, and usually it's the mother. And before, the mother has a cold, hard tub, but after purchasing the baby bath, she has this warm, squishy tub for her newborn. Before, she feels scared and frustrated because as a new parent, the feeling of hurting your child in a large ceramic tub is terrifying. But after, she feels confident and in control because her baby is snug and safe in the new tub. Before, her average day would consist of thoughts of how terrible bath time is, but afterwards, bath time becomes a breeze. And of course, her status to the baby and to herself before was unappreciated, but afterwards, she's become a super mom because bath time is relaxing for both her and her child. So before writing your content, try to use a similar checklist to go through the process of what the before state is of your typical persona and the after state once they use your product. And then while you write, try to incorporate these 4 categories when speaking to your audience. Tell them what they have now and what they will have later. Tell them how they feel now versus how they're getting your product will make them feel, and so on and so forth. And if you're interested in reading into this deeper, into the before and after state, I encourage you to check out the link at the bottom of the screen. It's an article by Digital Marketer, or you can just Google customer value optimization, or CVO. And it goes into this concept a little bit more detail.
Yeah, and one important thing on that, I love what you were touching on, is not only the idea of just understanding kind of the before and after state. It's helpful for the persona or for the end user to visualize what that state looks like. Mm-hmm. But as the person creating the content, put yourself through it. Be able to empathize and understand and be able to relate with what this person's going to experience. In the content marketing certification that launched last year in class 7, extending the value of your content through repurposing, I did an experiment where I took my truck and I turned it into a truck camper on the streets of Boston, where I worked in the back of it. In different parking lots and no, I'm in the Airstream. It's the tow vehicle. So this is 140 square feet. That's like 30 square feet. So 170 total square feet. But the whole experiment was something that I wanted to understand, and I created a step-by-step guide so anybody who has a truck or a tow vehicle can understand how they can repurpose it into a functional living space. So a lot of times, not only understanding and being able to put yourself in the shoes of what that after state looks like, but being able to actually empathize and be relatable with that audience.
Yeah, exactly. And okay, we have one more principle. This kind of has a little bit to do with that as well. So this principle might seem like a given, but I feel like a lot of people often forget what a reason to share really means. So it doesn't mean to tell people at the end of your article or in an email to please share your post on Twitter. No, it means seriously asking yourself, why should I share this? And will this help someone better express themselves? So I'm going to use the example of the Trump administration. Why is it that everything the Trump administration does goes viral, especially during the elections? And why are people, even those who typically don't follow politics, getting so riled up about this particular president? And I'm not sure how many of you, how closely you were following the elections, but apparently Trump got close to $6 billion worth of free advertising just because of viral content loops. So without going into too much unnecessary detail, it comes down to one thing, emotion. And most of the things that Trump says are either completely approved of and loved or completely abhorred and detested. There's not a lot of middle ground. And because of this passionate love and hate, people are becoming inspired to act in order to have their opinion heard. So when Trump makes a claim like his travel ban on Muslims, those who are opposed to his ban lashed out and cried out against it. And those who were greatly in favor of it retaliated against everyone else. So when people care about something, they speak, they write, and act out in response to that care. Now, it might not be easy to get people emotional, but let's say, a social analytics company. But what people do get emotional about is the stories of other people. So Founder Magazine sells this course to teach people how to grow their Instagram following. In order to build up the excitement about their course, they showcase success stories from those who've completed it. So what these stories do is they provide business owners with hope and motivates them to persevere. And for those who do find success with the course, they in turn share their stories with others out of excitement. So does your company have great success stories that are the result of your product or service? And can you tell those stories and strike an emotional chord with your audience? And for Founder, what they've found is that it's actually a great acquisition channel, because people identify with the stories and then they end up sharing it on their Facebooks, on their Twitters, and it gets them a lot of traffic that way and a lot of people signing up for the course.
Yeah, and another big point to even add to that is talk to your audience, right? Like, don't just say something and expect that you're just broadcasting, right? I think a lot of people, the two biggest mistakes I see is a lot of brands will have a hashtag that's their exact name, which why does that have anything of why you would want to communicate that, first of all? The second thing is that most brands would communicate to you as if they're talking to you, as opposed to it being a conversation, like it's a broadcast. And a good example of this, even like a small scale, my wife recently launched the e-commerce business for her family business, mountainmystic.com. And it was this idea of selling this magical mystical box that's very similar to a Birch box. And they did a test on Facebook where they asked their current audience, what do you love about the shop, right? Like, they told their customers how much they love them. And then they asked for them, what's your favorite experience of being in the shop? And then they explained that the box was for sale. But then underneath of it, there were all these comments about how people love the brand, about how people love the store and all the feelings they get when they come in. So really use that as an opportunity to use your audience as a way to even police and help you sell a message through. And it's just important to make sure that when you're talking to people, that you're engaging with them and not just broadcasting information out there.
Exactly. One example that I really like is Wendy's Twitter account. And the way that they engage with their audience, and they're very dry and sarcastic. So like people like it. So they continue the conversation and they keep wanting to talk and engage with Wendy's. And I think Gordon Ramsay does the same thing, right? Like, people are now sharing pictures of their food to Gordon Ramsay, and he just replies with a really like sarcastic and dry response of how awful the food looks. But it's funny, so people keep doing it. And that's and having these conversations and engaging constantly with your audience is the way to get them excited and to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and I think Gary Vee, what did he responded, what was like over 70,000 tweets of how much what wine paired with fish. So like, that's the other thing, is like actually talking back, not just saying something and letting people talk back. I feel like going up to a conversation, somebody says something until you walk away, it's just rude.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so here's a quick recap of everything we covered. So first one, solve a burning problem, find hacks to common struggles, bust a myth, challenge the status quo, reframe the question, bring in a new perspective, mash up multiple topics, go outside your immediate field, find niches and subcultures, explore origin stories, envision the before and after state, and include a reason to share. And remember that setting limitations for yourselves can actually push you to become more creative. So consider these principles the limitations for you, which will fuel better content for you and your brand. And I think we are going to go into the Q&A. So we'll ask Catherine to come back.
Awesome. Thanks for passing it off to me, guys. And thank you for an awesome session. I'm seeing a lot of great tweets about how much people are enjoying things. I'm seeing this one saying halfway through the hashtag viral content hacks webinar, and I have a bunch of ideas for my company. And they've got a really great GIF of Jennifer Aniston looking contemplative. So loving that people are loving the content. Feel free to, folks, use that hashtag viral content hacks to ask more questions, but I have one here for you. Is there a certain time of day or day of the week that I should publish content to help it go viral?
I don't think the time necessarily matters. I mean, if you post it at 4 a.m., chances are not that many people are going to get exposed to it. But yeah, I don't know, Justin, what do you think on that?
Yeah, so every audience is different. That's a great question, first of all, because people always want to understand when's the best time to communicate or send some sort of message out. Studies show that Tuesday and Thursday are usually best days of the week to do it because it's not teetering on the weekend. A lot of times sending it after lunch is really good because people generally go to lunch, and then when they come back from lunch, they'll check their emails. So if you can somewhat strategize to get it in there during that time. Sometimes I even like to do it during lunch because I know that people are going to be on their social channels while they're probably eating or going somewhere. People are always on their phones nowadays. But my suggestion would be to really test it out, test different times of day, but don't just find out what works and then always post at that time. Know that your audience is always growing and always changing. So you should always be testing and growing as well.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the time, like, people will make the claim that they'll do these studies and post them that, okay, these are the times that work, but then it quickly becomes saturated because everyone's doing it. So then it gets to the point where people are like, hey, I keep getting emails on Tuesdays. I'm going to avoid opening all these emails on this day.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a matter of knowing your audience and just testing out what works. But yeah, I like to try I'd like to just send it at different times and see what happens. But I think what it comes down to is the quality of that content. And if it's good enough, it doesn't matter what time of day it is, people will share it.
Unless it's 4 a.m., right? Unless your audience is up at 4 a.m. What audience would be up at 4 a.m.?
Niches and subcultures, right?
Yeah, that's true.
It depends. There's a lot of people. The meme culture, I can tell you, is up at 4 a.m. That's when all the memes get posted.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I got another one here. Do you have any advice for companies that are not trying to sell, but get a message across or get people to visit somewhere?
So think about that. Justin, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. So the question was not necessarily trying to sell something as much as trying to get a message out there. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that was a question.
Okay. So you want to be relatable, you want to be genuine. If you really want to get a message across, you need to show a reason why they should be listening to you and why it's so important that this message is something that they should consider, and put yourself into it somehow, right? Like, I don't know what the message is. If you want to tweet me at Justin R Champion, I'm happy to work with you one-on-one with it, because I'm a little interested to hear what this message is. But really, you want to connect with these people and you want to find a way of what can you do to show them that you're genuine through this. And if you can do that, if you can show that it's not something that's ingenuine or disingenuous, that'll be the first step of being able to spread a message in a real way.
Yeah. And really tap into their pain points. Like the first principle we covered was solve a burning problem, right? Identify what those problems are that they're having, and how can you formulate your message around that so that it helps answer those and helps add value to those people. And I mean, I guess an example could be like the recent fidget spinner craze, right? The toy itself is like, it's just a piece of plastic and anyone can make it, but everyone's on board with this toy because the message is that it helps people with ADHD or with anxiety. So that's how they've framed it. But it's just a matter of finding how you want to frame that message so that it appeals to a pain point.
Awesome. Thanks. I got another one here. Is creating content different for brands versus a personal blog?
I don't think so. A personal blog, at the end of the day, you're telling stories, you're trying to provide value. If you're a brand or if you're just an individual, your goal should always just be to educate and provide value, not necessarily sell right off the bat. That, like I said, should be a byproduct of the content that you're producing.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to even expand on it, I think the only thing that would really be different is what is the conversion point that you're trying to have this person take, right? Like whether it's a personal blog, whether it's a business blog, generally you always want to have some sort of relevant call to action, some sort of next step, whether it's to go to another piece of content, whether it's to download a piece of content, whether it's to talk to sales, whether it's to call me and learn how to build a truck camper. It's all about the conversion and figuring out what that next step is. For businesses, it's a little bit different though, because you could put in different, like automation, for instance, where you have emails trying to keep this person educated and engaged so that they can go to sales. So I would say that if you're a brand who's trying to sell something, you probably would have to be a little bit more proactive with it versus if you are a either a lifestyle or personal brand where you're just trying to get a message across.
Awesome. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Seeing quite a few questions coming in here. So how about, let's see. I want to make sure we're getting a good kind of spread here. What are your favorite apps to find trending hashtags or other trending topics?
Apps to use. I get most of my information from news, from like whatever is already trending on Facebook or Twitter. I don't use any apps to kind of track all of that. But yeah, if it's usually the news that I go to get any trending information. I'm sorry, I'm so boring.
No, that's an answer.
I get the benefit of working at HubSpot, where we have the all-in-one growth stack, and we have a social tool that allows you to find different conversations that are tracking by hashtag or even by influencer, by a specific person. And then you can put that person into an audience and engage with them and track that conversation. So I'd say HubSpot is a good one. Another one would be like Hootsuite or TweetDeck. And those are really helpful just because you can set up multiple columns and track different conversations. So for instance, I can have a content marketing conversation. I can have an Airstream conversation. I can have, I was trying to think of a third subculture, but I can't really get in there. But you can have all these different conversations and you could segment them. And the reason why that's helpful is because then you can have all these different conversations and you're not sitting in Twitter like, oh man, I got to go to these different areas and communicate. So having a platform that can allow you to segment the conversations, know what's going on, will allow you to easily manage what your content output looks like.
Awesome. It's awesome that you mentioned subcultures, Justin, because we have one coming in here. How do you find new subcultures and communities to engage with?
Go to Reddit. Like Reddit is like the hub of all weird subcultures and all weird niches. So that's usually where I go to. And yeah, Facebook groups. Facebook groups are so many interesting subcultures. You can type in any keyword and you're probably going to find a group on that thing.
A Google search is also another effective way. Like you're 100% right about Reddit. I think Reddit's probably the biggest one. Yeah, Google Trends, but even just going, here's a tip. If you just go to a search engine, or Google in this case, and you type in a keyword that's relevant to your brand or whatever you're searching for, and then community behind it, you're going to get a list of all these communities that exist out there that you might not have even knew existed. And then you'll be able to find what's out there. And with the subculture community, just like we talked about, you want to be human again, right? You don't want to go in there and put in something about like an offer you have, right? Like treat it like it's a party. You wouldn't go up to somebody and say, hi, here's this offer I have. I'll talk to you later, and then leave, right? You want to go into these communities. And if you really want to develop a credibility in them, you need to engage in it first before you go in and say anything. Listen to what people are talking about. And then when you respond, really think about how you're responding, and don't just come out the bat with an offer with a link to your page. Comment marketing is becoming a really big trend right now, where people are going to places like Quora and Reddit and answering questions, but people are just going in there and they're finding ways of just putting these links in versus developing some sort of credibility. So take the time to develop that credibility, because like we talked about, subcultures are where the highly engaged people are. And if they feel that you're disingenuous, they'll smell it a mile away.
Awesome. I've got one question about whether the rules change among industries. The rules for creating like awesome shareable content.
I mean, it depends on what your corporate culture is like. Some companies, and I think I mentioned this with the bust a myth principle, right? Some companies just like won't allow you to create extremely controversial content because they're scared that it's going to cause backlash for the brand. So yeah, it could depend on the industry, but I think overall these are general principles that anyone can follow, and they apply to no matter what industry. It's just a matter of identifying which one works best for you. Because with like, let's take the example of origin stories, right? Within every industry, there's an origin story of something. If you're like in the food industry, there's an origin story for coconut oil, right? Why is it so popular? Why is kale so popular? If you're the like infographics. What's the origin story of infographics? Where did they start? It doesn't matter what industry you're in. There's always a way of identifying that one thing.
Always be learning and always be testing. It's something that, like, do not stick with, what was it, a couple years ago, before I was with HubSpot, I was in an agency, and Facebook came out with where you were allowed to do promotions in the newsfeed. And that was a huge game changer, because now you were able to get, you were able to like gamify, like people either commenting or liking a post. So really see what happens, like see what happens with the digital space, whether it's a new platform that comes out, or if it's a platform update to whether like Facebook, Twitter, or Snapchat, and really find a way to get creative with it, right? Like you want to make sure that you're giving the content to your audience in the way that they like it, but find a way to constantly be growing and offering new things, because if you stop testing things, you could fall behind, and then you're not really going to find out whether or not you can continue optimizing and growing. And because digital media is ever evolving and fast changing, you should always be trying new things, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's really part science, part creativity, right? You need to be able to measure everything, but also be creative in the way that you execute.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Definitely measuring it too, because you can't just do these things without making sure you can measure it. Otherwise, is it actually working or bringing an impact?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you both. It looks like we're coming right up to the end of our time here, but I just wanted to thank Justin and Nadia for educating us today. Thank you everyone who's watching for your engagement and for all your questions and for tuning in. Feel free to jump back on Twitter with #viralcontenthacks if you have any further questions. And I'm sure that all three of us will be keeping an eye out and see what we can respond to. And keep your eye out for that recording to be up. It should come up in the next couple of hours, right up on the same thank you page that you registered on. But otherwise, have a great rest of your week and look out for
and just before everyone's goes away, just like as a special thanks, Venngage wanted to offer 30% to anyone who is thinking of signing up for the premium account. Like, it's also free to register. So if you want to try out the tool and you're considering using infographics in your content, I mean, a lot of the examples of viral content included in this talk were infographic examples. They're not only a highly shareable form of content, but they're useful tools, right, for summarizing complex ideas and information for your audience, and just setting yourself apart from your competition. So there's a code there. I can send it out. There's only 50 redemptions available, and it's only for 48 hours. So don't wait too long. And I think Justin had wanted to talk a little bit about Inbound Training Day.
Yeah. So right now I'm on a road show where I'm performing a series of workshops traveling through the U.S. Originally, it was only about 7,000 miles. By the end of the trip, it's going to be about 11,000, where I'm educating and inspiring people to create more effective content. And I'm doing all this. I'm teaching all these different businesses how to transform their content creation process. And along the travel route, I'm meeting up with other content marketers and constantly growing my skill set and ideas of how we can progress this. And it's all leading towards Inbound Training Day, which is going to be on September 25th. So if you're a business or somebody who is looking for a solution of how to grow or start and scale your content process at your business, this is going to be a great session. There's a lot of different examples and data to support this new process that we're coming out with. So if you have time and you're in the area, would love for you to come out and see you there.
Awesome. Thanks again to you both. And thanks again to everybody for watching, and have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Bye.